Hook, there seems to be a mistake, sir. You'll have to move for our VIP passenger. Her words were sugared with politeness, but her tone held something chillier, condescension. Standing behind her was Karen Whitfield, a white, affluent woman, pacing impatiently with her designer watch. Her gaze fell on Marcus, a black man, occupying her seat, 2A. There appears to be an error, sir. We require you to relocate to make room for our VIP passenger, Jessica. The flight attendant told, her voice condescending in spite of the courteous words. This seat is reserved for our platinum members. You don't belong and can't occupy it. Behind her stood Kara Nan Wickfield, an elegantly attired white woman tapping her designer watch impatiently. Her eyes darted between Marcus, the black man in the seat. He sat in seat 2A, which she evidently felt was her rightful perch. I always sit there. It is almost my seat, she grumbled loudly enough for passengers sitting close by to overhear. Marcus glanced up. Bewilderment crossing his face. He had done everything correctly, booked early, paid in full, showed up on time. He was a platinum member, yet somehow his occupancy of the seat was being presented as an issue to be resolved. Marcus quietly reached into his wallet and pulled out his platinum member card. I am a platinum member, he answered, matter of factly. And this is my design. Nated seat. The flight attendant's smile hardened. A flash of surprise crossed her face, immediately followed by resolve. I see, sir, but this specific seat is usually reserved for a superior customer. Nodding toward Karen Whitfield, our usual platinum member who gets on our plane quite often. The implication was obvious. No matter. His standing. Marcus didn't belong in that seat. Passengers started to realize. Phones slowly started to appear. The whispers began. What the flight attendants did not realize was that this minor act of discrimination would alter everything in the course of the next couple of hours. Not only for them, but for the entire airline, because the person they underestimated had their destiny in his hands. This story is the best example of when Karma shows up with a first-class ticket of its own. Have you ever been treated unfairly just because of how you look? Drop your experiences in the comments below. And if you stand against prejudice and injustice being served, hit that subscribe button right now and type justice. And where you are viewing from in the comments section. Marcus was not your average passenger. At 42, he was the founder and CEO of Right Tech Solutions, a $2.8 billion AI firm that focused on customer service technology. His program assisted companies in identifying and eradicating bias in their customer dealings, which is apt given what was about to go down. But Marcus's journey started years and years ago. Before his success, being raised in South Chicago, he trained himself to program at the age of 11 on a used computer. While other children played video games, Marcus constructed them, making little programs that later became intricate algorithms. His journey was not smooth. When Marcus was 16, his father was murdered in an attack that sent shudders through his neighborhood. Standing at his father's grave, young Marcus took a vow that would characterize his life and lead others to view one another as human beings. Before anyone else, that vow propelled 2 decades of unrelenting effort. Beginning his company in a small apartment, Marcus is programmed for 18 hours daily working part-time jobs to earn rent. That morning at airport, security cameras recorded Marcus assisting an old lady in trouble with her bags. Patiently, helping her to the gate. He held doors open for strangers, thanked all service workers by name, and tipped the airport cafe. Not because he was under surveillance, but because that is who Marcus Richardson was. Unassuming in his success, generous in his spirit. Now he was flying to give the keynote address to the Global Ethics and Technology Conference. As Marcus took his seat, first-class seat, a seat he had actually booked deliberately for the legroom, so he could get work done during the flight he chose to travel with. Skylux Airlines, because it was the height of luxury air travel, where first-class tickets were worth more than some people's monthly rent. Their platinum MERS had heated towels, champagne service, and reclining seats that turned into full beds. But behind this polished veneer, Skylux was in desperate need to update their reservation systems. Were in the dark age. Their customer satisfaction ratings had fallen, and they were jumping at the chance to sign up with a giant technology firm to transform their business. They desperately needed this deal. What Skylux's crew didn't know was that in Seat 2A was the CEO of the same company they were hoping would come to their rescue flight. Attendant Jess Ika Miller had worked for Skylux for 8 years. She took pride in being aware of the habits of regular first-class travelers. She always arranged for Karen Wickfield to have her preferred 2A, the seat that Marcus was sitting in now. Jessica had expenses to pay and was aware that Karen's generous tips paid her mortgage every month. We have a platinum member who sits in this exact seat all the time, Jessica said, leaning forward toward Marcus. Would you relocate to a different class seat? Her voice was civil, but had an undercurrent of anticipation, the kind that presumed compliance to be the only reasonable response. Marcus glanced up from his tablet. Slightly perplexed, he grasped his boarding pass and displayed it to Jessica. I apologize, but this is my assigned seat, he continued in a calm voice. I am also a platinum member. Karen Whitfield was standing in the aisle with no effort whatsoever to conceal her irritation. Other passengers could easily hear what she said. As I always sit there on this flight. It is almost my seat. The situation was rapidly becoming awkward. A number of passengers were now observing the exchange taking place. Jessica shifted from one foot to the other, looking nervously between Karen and Marcus. Sir, perhaps you'd be more at ease in another section, Jessica implied, her suggestion clear. She wasn't giving him another first-class seat. Marcus stayed. No thank you, he said sternly. I've booked this seat precisely for legroom because I have to work on the flight. Jessica's smile stiffened. She nodded stiffly and proceeded toward the front of the plane, where she sometimes looked back at Marcus. What ensued was surreptitiously spotted by a passenger in the aisle over car. Nan moved forward, apparently to place her bag in an overhead bin. As she did, she inserted a folded pile of bills into the pocket of Jessica, using practiced subtlety. I'll just help you out here with this one, Karen whispered, just loud enough volume for the surrounding passengers to hear. Jessica blushed as he took the money. In that instant, a straightforward seating dispute escalated to something much more sinister: a bribe to discriminate against a passenger on the basis of appearance. The mood in the first-class cabin had changed. Trevor, the cabin supervisor, walked to Marcus's seat with the arrogant stride of a person who was used to having his power unchallenged, his stance stiff, his expression set in what he probably thought was professionalism. Sir, we need you to move to fit our VIP rider, Trevor declared loudly enough for adjacent riders to overhear. His voice made it obvious this wasn't a question but an order. Marcus glanced up from his iPad once more, his face untroubled, but his eyes betraying a tired familiarity with such an encounter. I've presented my boarding pass and my platinum status, Marcus stated flatly. This is my reserved seat. Trevor's face clenched, a muscle ticked close to his jaw as he bent slightly, his voice becoming patronizing in tone that saw a few around him squirm in their seat. Maybe you are new to how things are done on this airline, Trevor stated with each word insistent, as if talking to a child. We make accommodations for deserving patrons who have distinct tastes. By then, the standoff had drawn the attention of almost everyone. On the first-class cabin, a businesswoman a couple of rows over discreetly held his phone at an angle towards the exchange, openly filming the deteriorating situation. Within a few hours, these clips would be watched millions of times on the web. Karen stood in the aisle, her designer purse wrapped against her chest, her irritation growing more and more theatrical. She glanced at her watch melodramatically before releasing an over-the-top sigh that rang out in the cabin. I have a very significant meeting immediately after arrival, she decreed to everybody and nobody. I require my standard seat. This is absolute nonsense. The other traveler's expressions revealed the true picture. You should vacate the seat. He does not even appear to be somebody who can afford it anyway, one of them said. Trevor, encouraged by Karen's acting, leaned down towards Marcus, his voice lowered to a whisper. But in the strained silence of the cabin, his voice was still audible to those around him. Sir, we can do this the easy way, or we can make this hard. Your choice. The threat hung suspended in the air, a moment drawn out into seconds, as travelers gasped in anticipation of Marcus's answer. Most people would have caved at this point. The force of public conflict. The force of public conflict. Implicit threat, the will to not escalate further. But Marcus Richardson wasn't most individuals. His composure never faltered as he gazed Trevor straight in the eye. I am not budging. he said resolutely. "This is my seat." 6 plain words, uttered without anger or hostility, but with utmost conviction. Trevor's face turned deep red. This wasn't going according to plan. He stood up, Stregdon adjusted his uniform tie, and without a word strode to the front of the cabin. He grabbed the service phone, his back to the passengers, but his frazzled motions were obvious to everyone. The lines had been drawn. What ought to have been a normal flight would become one that all of the individuals involved would ever forget. The atmosphere in the cabin was tense. As Trevor spoke in haste into the service phone passengers' share, a glance, some frantically typing on their phones, others looking on with undisguised curiosity. Marcus had fallen back to studying his presentation, his calm fa-fa-ta hiding nothing. What would have been racing through his head 5 minutes later? The cockpit door swung open. Captain James Reynolds stepped out, his weathered face fixed, dead, in a professional mask as he led Trevor down the aisle. Jessica brought up the rear, clearly uncomfortable with the growing problem. The appearance of the captain indicated to everyone that this had progressed beyond a mere seating disagreement. This was now a formal intervention. Captain Reynolds halted next to Marcus's seat, standing well over the sitting passenger. His voice possessed the trained command of a man accustomed to being followed without question. "Sir, I realize there is a problem," the captain started, his voice measured, "but firm. My team has the right to reassign seats as necessary for all passengers' convenience and comfort." Marcus glanced up at the 3 airline staff, now low, oming over him. The power dynamic wasn't subtle, 3 standing, 1 sitting. But Marcus's calm never faltered. "Captain, with all due respect," Marcus responded, his voice unwavering, "I have a confirmed seat assignment and platinum status. I have chosen this particular seat for the leg space I require to work on the flight. There is no policy that mandates that I relinquish my designated seat to another passenger who only prefers it." Trevor's lips twisted into what could only be said to be a smirk, the look of a person who thought they had all the cards. "Sir, if you keep being uncooperative," Trevor interrupted, "we'll have no alternative but to take you off the flight." The threat hit like a body blow. Marcus's eyebrows arched ever so slightly, the first moment of real surprise he'd expressed during the confrontation. "Are you threatening to take me off because I won't relinquish the seat I paid for?" he inquired, his tone speaking disbelief. The question hung there, its implications unfathomable. To disregard what conceivable justification might there be to remove a passenger who was merely in his seat designated to him before the captain could act? Karen's voice sliced through the suspense. "This is absurd," she cried, her voice rising dramatically. "I am going to miss my flight. I have never been treated this shabbily in all the years I've been flying." The irony of her gripe wasn't lost on the other travelers, several of whom shared glances of incredulity. Captain Reynolds, apparently realizing the scenario was getting out of control than he'd expected, assumed a firmer demeanor. "This is your last warning," he declared firmly. "Get to another seat, or we'll summon security." It was during this time that Marcus slowly reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone with measured motions. He opened his camera program and started recording. "I want to be explicit about what is going on here," Marcus spoke quietly, his phone recording the moment. "I am being threatened with being taken off of this flight because I am not willing to relinquish my designated seat to another traveler who wishes it." Trevor, his face twisted in rage, he went for Marcus's phone. His cool completely gone. "Recording is not allowed," he barked, his hand in a threatening position close to taking Marcus's property. Marcus yanked his phone back just out of the man's grasp. "In fact, there is no federal statute that forbids taping on a plane unless it distracts from crew responsibilities. I am just recording this exchange for my own sake." The legal insight caught Trevor off guard. He pulled back his hand, but his scowl deepened. "What would you have done if you were Marcus and been in his shoes? Would you vacate the seat or hold firm? Let us see your comments below. And don't miss clicking the subscribe button now to get more of these stories." The next thing that rang out across the cabin was the heavy tread of 2 security officers coming on board. Their arrival was a point of no return. The security officers advanced slowly down the aisle in practiced unison, following Trevor's pointing hand straight to Marcus's seat. The cabin had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient noises of the aircraft also appeared to have disappeared as all eyes were on the altercation. Marcus sat still, his posture upright, his expression calm. Despite humiliation being heaped upon him, his phone kept recording from where he had set it on his lap. "Sir," the first security officer started. "We'd been told there was an issue necessitating your ejection from the flight." Marcus nodded, once in recognition of the officer's presence, without compromising his dignity. "I'd like to know what particular airline policy I am infringing upon." Asked, his tone clear and measured. "I am sitting in my seat with a proper boarding pass and platinum status." The security officers shared uneasy glances. It was becoming more and more evident that they'd been summoned to escort a passenger who had done nothing wrong. "Sir, you must collect your belongings and come with us," the second officer said, evading the question altogether. Marcus fixed his gaze on Captain Reynolds, who was standing several feet away with Trevor and Jessica either side of him. "Am I being removed for refusing to relinquish my properly allocated seat to another passenger?" Marcus asked bluntly, his inquiry piercing the facade. "You are being taken off for causing a commotion." The captain answered, the word sounding empty even as he uttered them. A murmur spread in the cabin. An old man sitting in the second row shook his head in agreement, while a young woman sitting at the rear of first class dabbed her eyes dry. With quiet grace, Marcus started collecting his things. He shut his tablet case, stuffed his presentation papers into his briefcase, and stood slowly. Karen, who had been observing the whole scene unfold, made no effort to hide her satisfaction. A smug smile played around the corners of her mouth as she observed Marcus being led out of his seat. Her seat now, she thought, serves him right. He clearly doesn't belong. A voice from somewhere in the cabin. "But he didn't do anything wrong," called another passenger. "I am recording all of this," announced a third. But even with the remarks, Marcus was being removed. He walked with his head held high, his back straight, his eyes forward, the posture of a man who had confronted injustice before, and knew how to keep his it in its face. As he walked past the row where Trevor sat overseeing the removal, something occurred that would prove to be a critical item of evidence. Karen, believing herself unwatched, slipped another folded bill into Trevor's pocket. "Thanks for taking care of that situation," she whispered, her voice just loud enough to be heard by a number of passengers recording phones. First class should have standards. The meaning of her words lingered in the air, like a toxic cloud. As Marcus emerged from the plane, flanked by security, he took out his phone. Again, his fingers flew aftly across the screen as he typed a text message to his coolies. "I was taken off the plane, but they had targeted the wrong individual. To shame. While the majority of people would be flustered, angry, or humiliated following such an ordeal, Marcus had the calm composure of a person who knew how to read the waters. "Sarah, it is Marcus. I require you to round up the legal team right away." He spoke into his phone, his voice low and authoritative. "I've just been escorted off a Skylux flight in what amounts to a classic case of discriminatory treatment." The security officers who had escorted him off the plane hung around near their first certainty, giving way to uneasy realization. One of the officers read from the incident report on his tablet, his face becoming more and more troubled as he read through the facts. "Sir," the officer eventually said, reaching out to Marcus uncertainly, "I think there is a misunderstanding. The report shows you were being disruptive, but the long sum of the witness statements don't confirm that." Marcus brought down his phone for a second, his eyes fixed as he spoke to the officer. "There was a misunderstanding," he said, "but not mine. I was in my designated seat holding a boarding pass when I was asked to make way for another passenger's whim. When I refused, I was pushed away." The officer changed uneasily, looking at his partner, who was already retreating from the circumstance. They both understood they had been used to force something that had absolutely nothing to do with security measures or safety procedures. "We the trouble, sir," the officer made a promise of weakly, before leading his partner in a hasty retreat. Marcus promptly went back to recording the incident, reporting a full voice memo documenting every interaction, every word spoken, each nuance of body language he'd witnessed. As he talked into his phone, a young woman stepped cautiously toward him. She was holding her carry-on bag in one hand and her phone in the other. Marcus had no trouble recognizing her. She'd been sitting across from him in first class. "Excuse me, sir," she said, indignation creeping into her voice on his behalf. "I followed you off the plane because I couldn't simply remain seated and be a part of what was taking place. I taped everything from the instant that flight attendant first came over to you until they removed you from the plane. She held up her phone, showing Marcus the clear, unobstructed video that caught not only his being removed, but also the incriminating moment when Karen handed money to Trevor. This was blatant discrimination. The woman went on, her voice shaking slightly with feeling. You ought to have this. Marcus's face relaxed for the first time since the ordeal started. Thank you, he said with real thanks. This could really be useful. They swapped numbers, the woman vowing to send him the entire unedited video right away, and to give evidence if necessary. What she had no idea, what none of them did, was that her video would soon reach millions while in the back of the plane. Meanwhile, a very different scene was being played out. Karen Whitfield had made herself at home in Marcus's seat herself, satisfied smirk barely hidden as Jessica served a complimentary glass of champagne. I am so sorry for the disturbance, Miss Whitfield. Jessica served deferentially. We want the rest of your flight to be flawless in the galley, out of passengers' sight. Trevor and Jessica share knowing glances as Trevor quietly tallied up the bunched bills. Karen had given him $200, the amount they had agreed to in order to embarrass a man whose sole transgression was sitting in a seat he had rightfully paid for. Bought. Nice bonus today, Trevor whispered, stuffing the money into his wallet. Some passengers know how to present proper appreciation. Neither of them knew that this bonus would come at a great cost, more than they could ever have imagined. At that moment, a call was made to the crew for an emergency meeting. The call had been made by one of the airline's admin, informing them that they had just committed a serious error, which would cost them their employment. All three were terrified. As they exchanged looks in an attempt to comprehend what was going on, the mood had changed, and obviously they were no longer in power. Who was the man precisely they ousted from the VIP seat and pushed out of the plane on the top floor of the sleek glass-walled offices of Skylux Airlines? The CEO of Skylux, Richard Williams, was going through quarterly projections when the phone rang for an internal call from the public relations department. Sir, we might have a serious situation unfolding. The PR director's tone had a clear whiff of panic. A video is spreading fast of one of our passengers being escorted off a flight this morning. Williams sighed. At first, Cavalier passengers get ejected for being disruptive all the time. Janet dealing with the standard phrase, sir, this is different. The PR director pushed back. The passenger hadn't been disruptive. He was a black man in first class who wouldn't relinquish his designated seat to a white woman. The video captures our staff taking cash from the woman before and after he was removed. The blood rushed out of Williams' face as he grasped the significance. Send me the video now. As Williams viewed the footage on his screen, his expression changed from worry to terror. The blatant discrimination, the cash changing hands, the man's dignified demeanor being taken away. It was a PR disaster happening before their very eyes. Who is he? Williams barked. Have we found the passenger? There was a pause before the PR director replied, Yes, sir. Per the manifest, he is Marcus Richardson. Ensuing silence was oppressive. Did you say Marcus Richardson? Williams then posed his voice little more than a whisper. Yes, sir. Does that name ring a bell? Williams slumped back into his chair, gazing blankly at the ceiling. Marcus Richardson is the CEO and founder of Right Tech Solutions, the same corporation that we have been wooing for a $50 million joint venture, the same corporation that has been quietly acquiring our shares over the last 2 years. Miles from where we sit in a private airport lounge, Marcus sat at the center of a team coming together in a hurry. His crew, Elise Thompson, had shown up within 20 minutes of his text with their chief legal counsel and head of corporate communications, laptops open, phones ringing, and the air zapped with intense energy. The video has already hit 2 million views, the communications director said. In reporting, turning her screen to reveal the quickly rising figures. Big news outlets are picking it up now. Elise and Marcus shared a meaningful glance, one that talked of years of shared experience and common knowledge. They have no idea that we were already assessing their company culture for the partnership. Elise told, her voice with the bitter irony of the situation. I guess they simply gave us their real selves, unaware of who was observing in the Skylux headquarters. The social media department was in crisis mode. Screens presented the fast worsening situation. Skylux discrimination was gaining traction nationally. The view count on the video had hit 5 million, and celebrities were starting to expand on the story to their millions of fans. Williams was ringed by his executive team, their grim faces as they evaluate the extent of damage. Sir, his aide cut in. Phone in hand, I will get Marcus Richardson's office on the line, so you can ask to be put through to him directly. The room was silent. Williams drew a deep breath before answering the call on speakerphone. Mr. Richardson, he started, his voice strained with strained cordiality, I want to offer our deepest regrets for the unforgivable event that has taken place this morning. Wait, cut in the CFO who had been scrambling through files. The Marcus Richardson. The technology CEO. Williams nodded severely as Marcus's voice was heard through the speaker, smooth and measured. Mr. Williams, I thank you for your willingness to talk to me directly. As you might be aware, my firm holds about 25% of Skylux Airlines shares, a controlling interest. If combined with our strategic partners, the executives exchanged panicked glances, the full extent of the situation finally dawning on them. I wish to call an emergency shareholder meeting forthwith. Marcus continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Today's events have put heavy questions of Skylux's corporate culture and dedication to the ethical treatment of every passenger. An emergency board meeting had been called with unprecedented haste. Board members had rushed to get there from whatever they had been doing, some still wearing golfing attire, others having apparently run out of family gatherings. The air in the room was heavy as they waited for the arrival of the man who now wielded their destiny in his hands. When Marcus Richardson actually made his entrance, was instant, and charged conversations were cut off mid-sentence. Every head turned in spite of everything that had happened to him. That day Marcus had the quiet confidence of a man who knew precisely who he was and what he was worth, and he was wearing the same suit that he'd been wearing when taken off the plane. A subtle but potent reminder of the events of the day behind him led his executive staff. Elise Thompson, their attorney, and two others whose attendance would become pivotal to the change that was on the verge of taking place. As Marcus sat down, Williams operated a remote to lower the lights and power. On the huge screen in the center of the room, the video started to play crystal clear and horrifying in its substance. Each moment was recorded: the early confrontation, Trevor's attitude, the captain's tenuous explanations, and most critical of all, the money exchanging hands prior to and subsequent to Marcus's ouster. When the tape stopped, the room was still for a solid 30 seconds. Some of the board members were unable to look directly at Marcus. Williams cleared his throat, his face ashen, as he turned to confront Marcus directly. Mr. Richardson, we want say our sincerest regrets for the unacceptable manner in which you were treated today. This behavior is not within the values of Skylux Airlines, and I do not want apologies. Marcus cut off, his tone firm but resolute. The bluntness of his words caused a perceptible ripple in the room. Board members shifted uneasily in their leather seats, suddenly realizing that run of the mill corporate damage control would not be enough. As your single largest shareholder, Marcus went on, I have one requirement and one choice. First, all staff members who are involved are fired immediately. Second, I am calling off the planned contract between my technology company and this airline. Williams looked nervously at the board members before speaking. Mr. Richardson, despite your understanding of our frustrations, perhaps we should discuss suspending instead. Some of these workers have been with the company for decades, and our union agreements. This isn't on the table, Marcus said, putting his palms flat on the table. It is accountability, or I'll withdraw my investment and the $50 million contract. We were looking at the implications hung in the balance. 25% of their stock suddenly injected into the market would be devastating. The loss of the $50 million modernization contract would have them years behind the rest of the industry. As if on cue, the boardroom doors flung open. A young money man came running in, obviously having run from a different floor. He pushed a tablet at Williams, disregarding all rules of boardroom propriety in his haste. Sir, word of the accident is already impacting our stock price, he declared, winded. We're off 12%, and declining market analysts are calling for a potential 30% decline by the close if we don't act aggressively. Williams stared from the tablet to Marcus and then back again, the reality of his position dawning painfully. This wasn't just about a single incident any longer. It was about the survival of the airline. The airline would fail without Marcus, because all other investors will withdraw their stocks too if he were to go, and that would leave them bankrupt. The very person they'd taken away from the plane now had the airline's fate in his hands 3 levels below the boardroom, in a sterile conference room free of luxury. Trevor, Jessica, and Captain. This isn't about punishing the participants, he clarified. It is about changing your whole culture. What happened today wasn't just wrong because I just so happened to be a shareholder. It would have been just as wrong if I were a teacher, a doctor, or a student going home. The employees sat in stunned silence, some nodding in acknowledgement, some looking down with collective embarrassment at what had been accomplished in the name of their company. Beginning tomorrow, the CEO declared in the meeting's final dramatic moment, SkyU Airlines will enact a company-wide grounding to undergo mandatory training. Every flight, every route, every service will be grounded for 48 hours while our entire crew undergoes the initial stage of this initiative. The gasps could be heard in the auditorium. In an industry where delay by minutes cost by thousands, a 48-hour complete shutdown was unprecedented, costing the airline millions, but worth it for the message they sent about their willingness to transform themselves. As Marcus looked on from the stage, he observed the faces of the staff taking in this news. Some reflected resistance, others relief, but the majority showed an increasing awareness that this moment represented a profound change in their company's identity. In the ensuing weeks after the incident, Skylux Airlines experienced the most complete makeover in its 30-year history. Conference rooms nationwide were turned into training facilities. Flight schedules were altered so that all employees, ranging from baggage handlers to the CEO himself, went through the required program. The training was not the usual corporate checkbox exercise that workers had become used to. Respecting it was interactive, difficult, and sometimes awkward. Workers were challenged to see their own biases through advanced simulation exercises created by WRTX staff of behavioral psychologists and AI experts. Marcus took the time to present personally many of these sessions, standing in front of rooms full of skeptical, sometimes defensive workers. This is your chance to be part of the solution, he informed them, his voice bearing the authority of personal experience. What has happened to me happens to individuals who lack my resources and platform. Daily today we start to change that for a few. His presence was a catalyst, placing a human face on what management might otherwise have written off as a PR crisis to others. His willingness to speak out, despite being treated poorly, presented an inclination towards true change over revenge. Outside Sky's corporate bubble, repercussions persisted to unfold. Chev Jessica and Captain Reynolds found that in the age of the internet, accountability is with you everywhere. Their faces and names had become equality and discrimination in a profession where reputation is money. Trevor sat amidst his apartment, surrounded by rejection letters from other airlines. Past experience mentioned, but we've decided to go after other candidates at this point. The corporate language soft enough not to hide the truth. No one wanted to hire the gentleman in that viral CL. Jessica experienced same rejections, each one making her realize how one choice had the power to change the course of a career well established. After 8 years at one interview that had shown a lot of promise, the hiring manager's face changed the moment identification dawned. You are the flight attendant in that discrimination case. Aren't you? The interview last Ed just after Captain Reynolds, with 30 years of flight experience, was left unable to get even entry-level jobs in the industry, his illustrious career having been boiled down to those few minutes of bad judgment when he had let what was right go. Karen Whitfield wasn't exempted either. Skylock had slapped a lifetime ban, but the repercussions did not stop. At her preferred airline, she sat in her living room viewing news coverage of the event, her actions and name discussed by national commentators. Her company had put her on administrative leave awaiting an investigation into her behavior, for friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to be tagged as being associated with the woman now labeled as Airline Karen on social media platforms. For perhaps the first time, she was compelled to take stock of the actual effect of her entitlement. In the meantime, Skylux was making far reaching policy reforms, new regulations which set zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior, improved procedures for dealing with seating complaints, and safeguarding employees who reported abuse. The employee handbook was revised to make it clear that accepting bribes or money from passengers in return for special treatment constituted grounds for instant dismissal. Passengers started seeing differences almost immediately. Brief interviews taken at gates and bags claims indicated a changed attitude. The flight attendant appeared more alert to all, now remarked on one frequent traveler. Previously, there was always a perception of an unseen hierarchy, depending on what you were wearing or how you looked. I actually had an issue with my seat allocation, another passenger shared. But the manner in which they conducted themselves was fully professional. They managed to find a solution that worked for everyone without making anyone feel less valued, as promised. Marcus gradually reinstated his investment as measurable changes were implemented and verified by independent auditors. Sky's stock began to recover. Though the road back would be long, the company's hiring practices underwent a complete overhaul with diversity initiatives that went beyond superficial metrics to address fundamental issues of inclusion and representation. The transformation wasn't perfect or instant. Real change never was, but with every week that went by, Skyu was becoming the firm it had always professed to be in its commercials, one where everyone was actually treated like royalty. 6 months since the accident that almost wiped out Skyu Airlines, the firm was not only staying afloat, it was thriving. Passenger traffic had not only rebounded but grown by 12%. Employee morale ratings were at an all-time high. The poisonous culture that had long been festering in the shadows had been brought into the light and was at last beginning to heal. The biggest shock came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Marcus Richardson unveiled a new program through his foundation, the Second Chance program, specifically created for those who had lost their employment as a result of bias incidents. The program provided extensive rehabilitation training and an avenue back to a job. Responsibility doesn't equate to indefinite punishment, Marcus outlined during the press conference. Introducing the program, it equates to work your way back. We can't help build a fair society if we don't develop pathways for those who have taken responsibility for their transgression and made an effort to alter. Among the initial volunteers in the program were Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds. It was not an easy road for any of them. The program made them have to face uncomfortable realities about themselves to comprehend the effect of their actions, not only on Marcus but on countless others who went through the same but had no capability of retaliation. Trevor, who had been the most reluctant at first, had the most dramatic change in group work. He talked about coming up in a family where racism was taken lightly, about never challenging the prejudices he had been brought up on until they drained everything from him. I never thought that I was prejudiced, Ed, he said during one of the more intense sessions. I believed that just because I did not use slurs and hate people expressly, I was one of the good ones. This experience has taught me how bias functions, even when we do not realize it. In ourselves, Jessica's journey was centered on moral courage, being willing to stand up even if it is going to cost you. I knew what was going on was not right, she said, but I was frightened of losing my position if I confronted Trevor or the captain. Now I realized that my silence rendered me complicit. Captain Reynolds, the eldest of the three, maybe had the most difficult road. Decades of thinking that he had treated everyone equally were brought into question by what he did that day. I trusted the wrong things, he said. I trusted hierarchy above human. I'll spend the remainder of my career correcting that. With certificates from the program in hand, Trevor and Jessica started applying for entry-level positions with various airlines. Their applications now featured their story, not as an excuse, but as background to the change they had experienced. The certificates did not take away from their past behavior, but they displayed a willingness to change that some employers found appealing. Jessica was the first to land a job not as a flight attendant, but as a ground crew person with a regional carrier. The compensation was less than half of what she previously earned at Skylux. The schedules were longer and the labor was physically strenuous, but it was a second chance that she had previously deemed impossible. Trev obtained a job a month later on a different path, beginning in baggage handling at another airline. Captain Reynolds, in his age and years of experience, was presented with an alternative road. Would never fly commercially again, but came to serve a purpose in the Second Chance program, making others realize the results of the type of decisions he had made. Skylux itself was changed. Independent auditors verified what travelers had already observed. The airline now dominated the industry for the first time in customer satisfaction. In all demographics, Black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern customers reported service experience is comparable to or superior to those of white customers, a measure which should have been the norm but had never been reached in the industry. During a private session at Skylux headquarters, Marcus was seated across from CEO Richard Williams, studying the 6-month progress report. You've presented tangible change, Marcus admitted, closing the folder with the most recent metrics. That deserves acknowledgement. Williams nodded, the weight of the last month's clear in the new lines on his face. This hasn't been pleasant, he confessed, but it has been necessary. What occurred to you that day compelled us to face things we'd been avoiding for years. That is frequently the way change occurs, Marcus said, not through comfort but through confrontation. The two men rose and shook hands, no longer enemies, not close friends, but partners in a revolution that was reshaping not only one airline but a new benchmark for an entire industry. At times, justice isn't punishment. At times, it's progress. What happened to Marcus shows how quickly prejudice can destroy lives, but also how courage can change everything. Have you ever faced unfair treatment just because of who you are? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up for justice and equality, hit the subscribe button, give this video a like, and type justice in the comments to let the world know you stand against discrimination.